I am 34 years old and my son Sorley is 7 weeks today.
I'm 63.
And can you tell me the age of your sons?
Yes, my youngest son Danny, he's 31, and my eldest son Sean, he's 35.
I am age 64 and my stepson is 36.
I am 66.
And what age is your son?
Kevin is 40.
My age at the moment is 94.
Okay.
And I have three sons, and the oldest one is 66.
Okay.
And then there are twins who were born in 66, so that makes them 57.
57.
No. And your son's age?
Tom's 9. Well, I was approached and I thought it was really interesting. Yeah. And it's, that's the whole idea of me as a father to my son is obviously something I think about all the time. So it's not, it's something that's very close to me. And it's really important for me to always sort of think about it.
Probably intrigued to be part of an artistic process. Also intrigued about maybe reflecting on what fatherhood means and reflecting on my relationship I didn't have with Lee.
Your stepson?
Yeah, my stepson.
Just found it a really interesting and unusual topic for an art project. So just curious and interested to see what's going to happen with it and to be part of it.
I was just being sociable. You asked me, and you obviously wanted some assistance.
I imagine I am the newest father in the group,
Yeah.
and for me, especially at this stage, I'm just so excited about him, and this is just another way to explore that and talk about that, I think.
It's because it's an art project. I'm interested in anything related to art. Always have been.
That's a ridiculous question, because I don't think that you can lay down specific roles for each father and mother, because very often in circumstances a father can take a maternal role and a mother can take a paternal role. Yeah, and when we were first married, those roles were applicable, but as you say, they've changed in my lifetime, certainly. There certainly has been a big improvement in the roles that the father used to play, or the way things were sort of expected of the father then, and the role that he had to play. It was a pretty limited role, and I think it's much improved nowadays, where there's a much more evenly divided role.
Is there any difference? That's actually my position on it.
So has that been a consistent view that you've had throughout your life?
Not my life, no, definitely not. That's one I've come to through a whole lot of experiences in my life. Not as a father, but definitely when I became a father, wow, that was a whole different world of social constraint and pressure that I had not really appreciated that straight men in particular, experienced. And I felt really sorry for straight men. The kind of way they're kind of forced into these very particular rigid, kind of stigmatised roles, frankly. I've had my experience of being a gay man my whole life, so there's all sort of constraints and ideas about that I've always just rejected, and and the whole idea of being a man, whatever that means, I've had to kind of build for myself. So I was kind of liberated by that, I think. But then when I became a dad, it was like, wow, this bulldozer of kind of social roles and pressures and prejudice and about men, and I felt really sorry for straight men. So aware of it, really seeing it through the media all the time. It's just ever pervasive, and it's incredibly fucking boring because it's so stereotypical and it's so constraining. And I just see men buying into it all the time, and they're not happy with that, from what I can see, you know. And they adopt these roles of things like the breadwinner or the one that goes to, and it's I think it's sad for them. But equally, I saw it for women as well. Women were forced into these roles, so we kind of both had it, you know. But because we're both queer, I suppose, we kind of could reject it. We could see beyond it.
I think it's changing all the time, and especially in my experience, and maybe certainly in the current kind of ages, it's definitely changed. So I think that I still think that there's a traditional role of mother and father. That mother's the nurturing one with the kids all the time. The father being the role model, disciplinarian, always working very hard. So that's a traditional model. I think it still pervades. I've experienced that myself personally and with my family. But I also believe very strongly in those roles have to change. And for the sake of the children, of the sons, and absolutely for the sake of the actual father themselves as well.
It's been very stereotypical. You want to sort of imagine a situation where both parents can give the child a range of things, and it's not, I guess the stereotype is the mother is the sort of the caregiver and the emotional support, and the dad is
breadwinner.
Yeah, exactly, and probably the one, the fun one or something where you can like have a laugh and carry on and be silly. I guess that's what society conditions you to think, but I think that's changing. I think that really is changing. I'm 7 weeks in, so my experience is a bit limited.
I think my mother, it's the difference between mothers and fathers. So I didn't have my father around very long to get much of an influence from him, but my mother left a huge impression. And I don't know if it was her job, if she's responsible for creating the moral compass that each of us have. But beyond that, she sort of impressed upon us, I suppose, a code of ethics or a code of behaviour that I don't think you'd expect to get from a father. In return, I've tried to impress my son with the same sort of things, and he hasn't been impressed by that very much neither, and my daughter. But I think that's what I think a mother teaches, maybe morality and those kind of areas, maybe a philosophy of life or a philosophy of care and consideration for other people. And I think a father's role is to sort of prepare their offspring for the vagaries of the world as well as you can in the environment that they live in. I don't know. I'm aware that when my kids were younger, I was terrified all the time. And so I think I was quite heavy on them, on my kids, and trying to impress upon them like the dangers of the world, etc. I think a mother teaches morality and compassion and empathy and what have you, and I think a father teaches angst.
By the time I met Lee, he was just coming up for 12. So my wife Karen and Lee, they were like a bond. They'd been pretty much, Karen had been pretty much the sole parent for Lee for most of his life. So they had that bond. So me coming in at 12 and getting to know, when Lee was 12 and getting to know him was exciting, but also I felt I had to approach it without being overbearing and not try and be too pushy with him. I had to get him to, felt we had to sort of develop a trusting relationship that based on mutual respect. I always think there's two sides of Scottish nature, whereas you're kind of be reticent and not want to show your feelings too much. And I said that on the surface that's me, but underneath there's just a emotional turmoil taking place. My mum died first when she was 67, and he died probably about 10 years later. He was a very consistent person in my young life, and up to the time I left home, and then it was a case of just keeping in touch with my mum and dad when I was living a single life, going along most Sundays to see them, sometimes going for a pint after. Remember one night when we were we used to see one for the road, and then there'd be another one for the road, and that week there was like quite a few for the road, and then there's one night I was going upstairs, yeah, and my dad said, "I love you," like that, and that's not something he said very often. Is it something you need to say, or sometimes, again, is it something you show, you display by your actions?
Not as present as my mother. My mother didn't work. She stayed at home to have the family and bring us up. And he worked. So he was away 9 to 5 every day of the week, except for weekends. So we did see him. And I do remember going away with the family a couple of times, and they were a very loving couple, my mum and dad. But he wasn't around long enough. I have one great memory of, after we'd moved to Teviotdale, what we called the side garden. When we moved to Teviotdale, there were white picket fences around each of the gardens. Bizarrely, they didn't last. They all came down. But in the first couple of years that we were there, and he played 2-touch football with me in the side garden. I mean, I've got enough of an impression about him to know that he was a considerate, caring individual. That he wasn't like the vast majority of men I've met in my lifetime. He was quite a kind, generous soul. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't around to make much of an influence, so I think most of what I became came from my mother, rather than him. And it always left me confused about the role of what a father is in terms of a son. I mean, I've met and probably adopted other fathers over the years. But they've all been sort of musical. Joe, he was a painter. and a very opinionated artist as well. So that's fine. So we were encouraged to be opinionated about things and what have you. So I guess he was, in some ways, responsible for that. But the majority of the people that I think that I adopted in a kind of paternal way, or felt they'd adopted me, were musical people.
My dad, yeah, I mean, I think my parents were together until I was 13 or 14. So structurally, me and my dad lived in the same house, but my relationship was different with my mum and my dad, and it was probably, although not a totally kind of like 1960s stereotype of the mother and the father, there was still some differences there, and my dad was the one I would go, we would go on, we would go swimming, and we would go and play football, and we would go on big cycles, and we would do the fun stuff, whereas my mum was the one I went to when I fell over and hurt my knee, or I needed that like emotional support. So now, so mum and dad split up when I was 14, and I took that really badly, and I eventually went to live with, so probably by the time I was about 16, I was living with my dad and kind of like estranged from my mum to some extent. So for a long time, my dad was both my parents, I guess. He had to serve all those roles, and I think I always find it, but maybe because of that time, and maybe because of personality types or whatever, I've always found I've got an emotional connection with my dad. I can sit and I can me and my dad can sit and we can talk about anything. That there's not sort of like things I don't speak to my dad about. We talk about anything and we can kind of cry together.
There's two answers to that. It's a lot and not much at all, and I'll explain the reason why. Is that I was part of a naval family, so to speak. He was in the Navy, so he was away for 6 months at a time, a lot, and my mum raised me and my brothers and sisters. So, but when he was back, he was full on. So he was the father, the full time father. But obviously, when he's away sailing the seas, he couldn't be. So, I had a bit of both, absent. But when he was here, you know what a father should be. In terms, I couldn't say in terms of like not nurturing role. I can't say that about my own father because he absolutely was. So I would say on this when he was here, yeah, father role, caring, involved.
When I was younger, I would have said nothing, which would have been a complete denial of how much he actually was present. Because he was there all the time, he worked. My mother worked full time. We were working class. My father was very present when we were young, and I've got memories of that. So he was doing that. But there was also lots of really toxic stuff as well. He was very fucked up. Yeah, he was. But then they all were. I don't know any who weren't actually. And my dad wasn't by far the worst. In some ways I felt lucky because I saw what was happening to other friends and other members of wider family. There was always an undertone of tension, always. And that's what I mean by omnipresent. And as we got older, that relationship really just kind of fractured because we were no longer young children, and his situation changed. The jute mills shut down. He became unemployed. He was a weaver, so that was, it's a skilled working class kind of role. That was all disintegrated. His identity disintegrated, along with 3/4 of Dundee working class men. And there was lots of aggression and shouting and violence at times,
Okay.
But it didn't have to be violence for it to be violent. So as I got older, as a teenager, and I was obviously gay, then that's obviously a relationship with my father, but it's a relationship with everybody, because when you grow up in that time, this is late 70s, kind of early mid 80s, there's no place to go. You're hated by everybody, and the fear of your family's just there's no refuge with your family. So that flavours it for me as well, which may be different for my older brothers. I do remember. I also have a flash memory of when I was ill. I was about 12 or 13. I was at secondary school. I'd been ill for about 2 weeks. I was in bed, and he came up and was giving me tablets. And I was hoping I could never swallow them. I was terrified. He'd shout at me. But he was really patient and really kind. And I remember when he went away out of the room, I thought, I think he might love me.
Well, not very pleasant at all. The World War II came along starting in 1939 when I was 8 years old, and I must have been about 9 or 10 when he was required to go up to Aberdeen to do the job that he did at the time. So that when he returned to the family home, by then I was 12 or 13. Then I was called up for national service when I was 18. So best time that he could have influenced me was between 14 and 18. But he didn't. When I became 18, went off to do my national service for 2 years, came back for about 6 months and rejoined the Air Force, and I was way out. The relationship between my father and I was not very close.
I think I had a good childhood and my parents were great parents, but you always want to sort of, because that's your only experience of parenthood, you want to learn from that, and there's things you probably you do and don't want to do in relation to what your parents did.
The similar aspects with myself and my father was I think we tried our very best to perform maybe the kind of the kind of traditional role of the father and be the breadwinner and be the one that earned the money. Although I believed in equality between the sexes and all the rest of it, I definitely took on that mantle. But at the end of the day, it rests with me to earn the money. He was an emotional man, but he didn't really get connected emotionally. I wanted to be emotionally attached.
And I knew no matter where I went in the world, if I needed him, he would be there. And that's something I bring to my son, that I'm always going to be there for him no matter what. My son's told about a dozen times a day how much I love him. We talk to each other about how much we love each other. The expression of love, verbally and also demonstratively. My father could only be affectionate and demonstrative when he was drunk. But that's when my dad would be most affectionate, and that would terrify me.
Well, I'd like to think that I was much closer to my children. I was very close to Graham. He was our firstborn. He was our only child for 8 years because we were, at that time, we wanted another child. That baby never arrived until, ba-boom, my lovely daughter arrived. I was in the Air Force and I moved around a fair bit. It wasn't until I moved back up to Leuchars and the twins arrived, much closer to them because there was much more expected of me. Usual procedure would be to come home in the evening and hear what they had been up to, and they were probably confined to their room because of what they'd been up to, and I would march up the road and shout and bawl at them for a while. But strangely enough, because of that, I'm quite close to them.
The similarities are, his parents weren't around for long. His brothers and his sister were all fostered out. I mean, when they were toddlers. So I never met his family. And that must have made a giant impression on him in terms of the way that he thought about the ethics of bringing up a family and how he engaged with us. He didn't have a father who could teach him or make an impression on him, and in a lot of ways very grateful for that, because apparently his father was an alcoholic womanizer. We didn't have any time for children because they interfered with his life. So my dad was the complete opposite of that. And I'm glad that was the sort of influence I got rather than the alcoholic womanizing type sort of situation. Kevin quite a lot, I think, up until he was kind of late teens, I was like constantly sort of on his case. But I was always super worried about him getting picked on or getting led astray. So I think I was quite hard on him, discipline-wise, until he was late teens. And then he kind of broke down in front of me one day and said, "Look, Dad, I'm 17, you're going to have to give this up." And I was so shocked by it, I thought, and that changed our relationship from that point on. So we've got a better one now.
He was like that protective, like nobody's going to mess with my boy or his friend. So there's that kind of respect from my dad. Always wanted to provide for his family, responding when my son wants to talk to me, then you're there to do it. You want to do it, and it feels like a privilege, and that you want to talk to you and share things with you, or say, "Look, this is an issue that's going on." That's a privilege. There was a major part of me who wanted to create my own identity, whereas I had to find my own path. And my dad, I think, realised that. He realised that I wanted, that I needed to find my own path. And that's something I've got in common with with him about parenting as well. I felt the same about Lee. Lee needed to find his own path.
He's half time with his mum and he's half time with me. So when he's with me, I'm simultaneously mum, dad, and sibling with Tom. When he's with me, I'm always with him. I don't work when I'm with him. So I finish my work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I won't work again. I'll make up my time when he's not with me. So I've always done that.
Not as much as I'd like to be, and again, that's down to just location and geography, I guess. You know, one of my sons is somewhere else in the world just now. My other son's, you know, a different city, but travels a lot. So, I make an effort of always contacting him, even if it's just a text, you know, almost like weekly. So I stay connected with him. It's always been a regret. I should have done a lot more when they were, you know, not necessarily very young, because I did a lot with them, but certainly when they were, you know, teenage years and getting into adulthood, I should have been a lot more closer to them. But in terms of keeping in touch, trying to develop a relationship, you know, I make lots of efforts, and it's a bit easier these days with, you know, all the social media and stuff.
I'm financially present in my son's life, and he chose to live in London about 15 years ago, and he moved down, and I supported that. And he's done very well for himself in his own situation. But he coped with it well, and went on and has since, you know, gained a family. So I'm less concerned about him. We speak every week on FaceTime, and since his son arrived, we try to get down like 2 or 3 times a year and get them up and try and get more kind of family things oriented.
Compared to when I was growing up with my dad, it's more texting and social media, because Lee is down in Greater Manchester. I met Lee when he's about just starting his teenage years. Maybe Lee's nose was out of joint because there's this guy coming in and steal my mum away from us, and maybe we didn't realise things. I didn't find it too difficult because Karen and Lee, I think we made it work, but I think Karen and Lee accepted me, and you just don't know how. There's a secret formula to make your son love you in this kind of way. There isn't. It's just, I think it's being yourself and sharing, you know. Well, I'm not perfect, by the way.
It's difficult and complicated in the sense that, because he wasn't around for very long, the kind of overall impression I have of my dad is one of gentle, kind, considerate, brave, particularly, and growing up, there's a kind of anxiety because you feel, I mean, always, he died when he was 41, so when I was approaching that was a big milestone for me. But from him, it's aspects of his personality and his way that I remember. I don't think of them strictly, I've never considered them as being parenting skills that I might have adopted. Right. Just impressions of him that I've sort of carried with me.
Yeah.
And because there was never a kind of negative aspect of our relationship, I've tried to maintain a kind of positive relationship with my kids for as long as I've had them.
Kind of everything about fatherhood, because that's the direct experience. That's the only direct experience I've got. You know, my dad was working in the film. I was going to school in the film. We're living in Edinburgh. We're moving about different flats in Edinburgh. We were living in, I guess, what you'd now call a blended family. So it was just like it was chaotic. But at that point, I probably craved stability and to be normal, and when because that's But I think that's how you feel when you're that age. I mean, it's my dad's someone that he's just really solid. He's like, you can just. It's making me upset. He's just. Upset in a nice way, because he's just a person you can just go to and ask for something or to do something, and he will always just do that unconditionally. So someone who is just dependable and is just solid and will always support you and be behind you and help you. I think that's really important as well.
I think a bit of education and culture. My dad was very much very and quite well read. It could be quite philosophical at times. Calmness and fairness. Being a good dad himself. He's a dad now. He loves his son, which is really good. He was let down by his dad. He had a dad who was not present in his life. To have then somebody who was like actually a consistent person and loved him as if he was his own blood, which I do, and I don't there's no issues about that at all. He's my laddie.
I did try to take an interest in what they were doing and what they were perhaps going to achieve. I had part of the time a non-existent relationship with my father, and then in my teenage, when I really needed a bit more support, I didn't have it, and I did. That obviously influenced me with all of my family, that I would try to give them some support.
The most important thing that a parent can do for their child, and it's the most important thing that I think's for Tom, it's that he grows up and loves himself and likes himself. I don't care what he does or what he becomes in life, as long as he likes himself. I can't think of anything more important. The rest of it kind of comes, So that for me is really important. To my dad, I don't believe he didn't like himself. He couldn't. So, and I feel terribly sad for my father.
I learned from my dad that you always provide for your family, you try your very best. Like with my dad, in practical terms, support, money, security, protection, all those traditional things which I think both parents should do. So I've definitely assumed that role, and I see that's absolutely critical and fundamental if there's nothing else there. But I've also probably have to developed or want to develop my own kind of what we touched upon earlier on about the more nurturing side of it, the more maybe the kind of the mother's role being equated to the father's role.
Well, obviously the relationship I had with my father wasn't terribly good because he drank too much. And he just wasn't there in my earlier teenage years. And I just never developed a worthwhile relationship. I cared about him, but it was a pretty minor thing.
And I also, and it's really important for me to say this, despite what I've said about the difficulties with my dad did try to repair that with us. He didn't treat us the way he was treated. He got a diluted version of it. So I've always recognised that you know what, you did in some way, you tried, and I get it. Okay, but you had limitations, and you were never going to get beyond those limitations because you were your fate was sealed in the time you were born in, the place you were born in. And I absolutely am really clear about that with myself, that I continue to repair that because that's part of the family line. And I try as much as I can. But I think that's something I did get from my dad and my mum, is being reparative and not replicate what actually happened to me or what happened to him. So I totally acknowledge that, and I totally respect it, actually.
I definitely got from my father responsibility, security, being the provider, the breadwinner, all those traditional kind of things. I've definitely got that from him. The other side, the more emotional side, I think I've kind of I've developed in myself my own strong sense of what I believe in terms of family and mother father roles and things like that.
I see quite a lot of single parents, mum and dads that have split up, and kids, particularly boys, who are struggling with not having a significant male figure in their lives, and they're quite angry, they're quite ready to get into fights, and you worry about some of the kids that and who they perceive as who is role models to them and who's not. I think children need good role models, whatever, male and female, and maybe there's not enough some around, but some are just obviously not suitable. Plus, some of the kids have got a perception that maybe their mum and dad is split up and they think it's their mum's fault, or they'll worship their dad, who's basically a tosser, to be honest. There's a bit of fixing to be done there, I think.
Yes, of course it has changed for the better. I would applaud that. I mean, the idea of fathers taking their sons to school in my day, it just didn't happen. Well, see, in my day, it was a predestined role that you had to play, that fathers went out to work and they came home and they didn't show emotion.
Well, I think boys generally are allowed to be a bit more expressive, a bit more human. Boys are not allowed to have proper friendships. They weren't allowed to have proper friendships. That stuff's nothing to them, and I'm totally full of admiration for them, that they're much more in tune with themselves, much more in tune with their boy pals than we ever could have been. So I'm really hopeful actually about them, about what they could bring to the next generation and what they're doing, because we had to fight ourselves to get to that point. We had to fight our own upbringings to get to that point.
But I think certainly in my adulthood, since I became a father, and with my own beliefs, it's changed dramatically. I think there's still resistance, and unfortunately, even in the 2020s, there's almost resistance, and some people like it to go back the way it was, which I think's ridiculous. I think the biggest change in terms of father, and again, I can reflect this, personally myself, is that there's a lot more men, and that are quite prepared to take on a much different role of being a father. Almost taking a lot of what is seen as the mother's role. On the face of it, they're absolutely up for it. I think, again, this is a wider issue. I think a lot of men aren't really equipped to take on the role that they would like to do. And again, that's to do with education, upbringing, the role models from previously. There's some mothers, I guess, might resent fathers taking over some of their territory, but I think on the whole, they're saying, yeah, about time.
Yeah, I think society's changed quite a lot, and I guess in the 30 odd years I've been alive, even just like structural things like paid paternity leave. I think fathers are much more involved in their sons' lives at an earlier stage. I've got a brother that's 20 years old, and his upbringing was so different from mine, even though we're kind of 15 years apart. I think just like technology, phones are just so pervasive now, and kids can, whereas I just missed that smartphone thing, and we were like, running about, playing football, so to be a parent is really different now to what it was, to what it's ever been like. You can be a good dad, but maybe that's not enough.
I mean, technology's evolved rapidly, and we're going through a period of real rapid kind of expansion or evolution of technology. But as a species, we haven't really matured at the same rate anywhere near like it. I worry about that because the extremes seem more exaggerated. You know, like male toxicity is something that we're much more aware of these days, and we've got characters like Tate and all the rest of it, you know, regularly appearing on TVs, and we've got, you know, youngsters, young males have had access to pornography through the internet and have a really distorted view of women. That worries me, because we haven't learnt to control social media in a way that really benefits ourselves. People use it as a way to kind of broadcast ideals, and unfortunately the loudest and most popular ideals are the ugliest. So I think a father's job nowadays is even more difficult, because they're having to navigate a landscape of toxic masculinity alongside an evolving kind of situation of compassion and empathy for like the LGBT community and different races and all the rest of it. And I think there has to be some kind of cathartic event for that to change. It's a totally different world from the world where I was given an Encyclopedia Britannica. Do you know?
If I'm sitting here thinking about my three sons, I get on all right with them. Yeah.
Men get bad press. Fathers do get bad press. They're often rendered incompetent by what's around them, and they lack that confidence. I hope, and I do see it, that men can move beyond that.
I'll give my own father credit for instilling in me the role of a father, albeit traditional sense, and I wanted to take that even further. I think that was my plans, and you know, I wanted to be a father, and I wanted to be the best father I ever was in all senses. So I think what what kind of spoiled things to a big extent, and it's still an impact now, and a cause for a lot of my own reflection, different feelings, is you know, I went through a pretty bad breakup. The kids were young, so again, I kind of got regrets. All I can do now is well, keep being the best role of my father role as I possibly can, them being adults, and also, well, I've got an opportunity to hopefully be a good grandfather role as well, and you know, instill those beliefs. The other thing I'll say is, which is good and bad, it's like I got diagnosed with ADHD, and you know, later on in life in my 50s, and the reason I got that is my youngest son Danny was diagnosed with ADHD, you know, from a very young age, so we had to live through that, and then through that I thought, wait a minute, there's a lot of similarities, and I actually reflected on my father as well about, you know, how he was, and then basically, so to cut a long story, I went and got diagnosed and found out that I've got severe ADHD as well, and in some ways that has created a really strong bond with my youngest son Danny, because he, you know, I can't change, you know, what he experienced as a young, and it wasn't very good from lots of respects. We tried our best, we didn't quite understand it, but that's created a really strong bond. Me in my 50s, him, you know, in his 20s. Doesn't matter how old your kids are, you know, just, you know, try and get closer.
Because men have been conditioned in such a way for so many centuries and generations to be that father-son relationship actually has the potential to be the most difficult one, because it's two sort of people who are conditioned to be slightly emotionally detached and macho and all that. I think structurally there are problems with masculinity, and I'm not perfect and he will not be perfect, and there's just like an inbuilt structural challenge there for both of us to have to be emotionally connected. I think it's very easy for fathers and sons not to be that.
If fathers weren't given the role of teaching, you know, like things like compassion and empathy, but I think it's something that fathers in future need to be able to do with their sons to make a proper impression. Otherwise we're going to end up with an awful lot of angry young men and